right. So the multi, that's right, no multi-housing was in.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 6:30, and I will call our regular work session meeting to order. And our work sessions are very informal, and we go directly to the items on the agenda. And the first item on the agenda this evening, perhaps we should go around and introduce ourselves for our guest, who is here to present the first item, which is our member of the Metropolitan Council, Stephen Chavez. So thank you for coming. And I'm Elizabeth Couts, Mayor of the City of Burnsville. And
Suzanne Wynn, Council Member.
Dan Keeley, council member.
Heather Johnston, City Manager.
Dana Hardy, Administrative Services Director.
Steve Chavez from the Met Council.
Patrick Boylan from the Metropolitan Council.
Jenny Faulkner, Community Development Director at the city.
Steve Albrecht, Public Works Director.
Bill Coughlin, City Council.
Mary Sherry, City Council.
Michelle Brooks, City Clerk.
okay, and in the audience,
Laura Holly, Planning Intern.
okay. So welcome, Councilmember Chavez, and we welcome you and thank you for coming and talking to us about what's going on at the Met Council. And you're here to give us an update on Thrive, and so you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, and good evening. First, thanks to the mayor for serving on the Land Use Advisory Committee. Appreciate the commitment. Also, the way our orbits overlap in the various organizations that we serve on. Thanks to Councilmember Keeley for your service with MVTA. So just wanted to acknowledge that I understand the commitments all of you make in the community. Another evening you could be out doing something in the community this evening, but you choosing to dedicate it here. So we just wanted to acknowledge that. The primary objective of this visit was just to touch base just for a few minutes, nothing extensive with regard to Thrive MSP 2040, if you've heard about it or haven't heard about it. The state law, the statute, that one of the obligations for the Metropolitan Council is every 10 years is to update what I call a strategic plan for the region. The legal term is the Regional Development Framework, kind of a boring name, but that's the state law. So it's a 30-year plan, which is much longer than most businesses, but for the region, because of the lifespan of various infrastructure capital investments, that statutory obligation focuses on regional parks, the wastewater systems, because of the statutory obligations of the operating systems of Met Council. Transportation, which includes transit, but also includes airports, for example, and roads. But again, it's a planning tool. So those are the three major areas dictated by statute. In addition to that, also by a separate statute, has to do with water supply. So it's beyond just the water treatment. And it's not the water supply plan. It's a planning tool. It's not an enforcement tool or regulatory by any means. It's strictly just planning, but it's required by state law. So the project began about 13 months ago, and I've been serving as one of the core members of actually developing, designing the elements going into Thrive MSP 2040. So there's 5 of us council members. We're not actually writing text, but we're helping design. Like if you were building a house or designing a road in Burnsville, it's designing the specs, what's going to go into that. And then we work closely with staff, just as your staff would be here, and you would give the policy direction to staff to outline it, develop the elements to it, and then begin to actually craft the text for it. But there's a lot of policy decisions that go into that. So I believe you've been provided in your materials in the packet for this evening's meeting, just a 2-pager highlights of what's going into Thrive MSP 2040. On the bottom of the first page, you can see some key attributes, what we call outcomes of prosperity, livability, sustainability, principles by which or lenses that we're using to examine the policy questions. Collaboration, it's a big one for us to work with you. We've heard very clearly, and also we've served in capacities, some of us have served in capacities in your roles, about one size doesn't fit all. Don't cram it down our throats. More than even listen to you, hear you, absorb, see what we can do to process, then collaborate on that. In addition to those key principles, equity, stewardship, integration, and accountability. Example of integration, what we're talking about there is policy or procedural integration. At any large organization, private or public, it is normal, natural for silos to emerge. What we really are striving for is to break down those silos, literally and figuratively, but also to have the teams talking with each other. So when someone from wastewater treatment, environmental services, is planning for something, stop operating in the silo and start talking with community development. How does that relate to transportation or transit, and vice versa on all the others? We have 6 draft goals at this point, and again, they appear on the bottom of your page, but basically focused on natural resources, which translates into parks, globally competitive economy, and again, we're not talking about Met Council becoming economic development. That is not it. We're really trying to support community development. Then, with regard to alignment of land use development patterns, infrastructure with public-private investment, housing options for all life stages, a multimodal transportation system that really focuses on connecting people with freight and beyond the region, seeing that as a market. And then also looking at climate change as far as preparing the region for the challenges and there are opportunities with climate change. You really become entrepreneurial about it. As far as timeline, again, we've been working on this for about 13 months. We're at the point now, we've been discussing at the council all the various policy topics within Thrive, and we work on about a 4-week cycle where we introduce something for about 60 minutes and deep conversation, arguing, cajoling, negotiating, whatever you want to call it in a session, and then come back 2 to 3 weeks later after staff has had time to digest our comments and come back to us with a proposal as far as an outline of what the elements would comprise for the actual policy statement on that subject. We will be returning to the community, the greater region. We haven't set the exact schedule or the locations, but if you might have seen or heard of our outreach efforts, we've done 2 phases. The 3rd phase will be probably late fall, where we come out into the communities. We notify all of you and the community residents seeking basically like an open house. This time we will actually have something for people to read in advance, chew on, and begin to give us comments, positive and negative. And then as far as the deliverable, that is, the draft will be going to the federal government the end of the year, and then the goal is by next spring, don't have a specific targeted date yet, but late spring, early summer, is actually be done with what I call the 80,000-foot version of Thrive MSP 2040 as a strategic plan. That is a policy umbrella tool. Then underneath those, you may have your staff, your teams may have actually worked in the past with what's called the policy plans, transportation, the environmental services or wastewater, and parks and regional parks. Those are that's the implementing tools. Thrive MSP is 2040 is really the policy position statement. Those have a longer fuse because there's much more detail involved in those, and those will be finished mid to late 2014, and those will be then implemented in 2015. And again, we'll be coming back with an open house. I don't know where in this district it will be occurring yet or when, but you'll be receiving invitations for comments. In addition, you can provide comments to me verbally, email to the team. There's also a Thrive MSP 2040 webpage that you can submit comments there. We use social media as well. So that's a very high level, very quick, dirty for you. Any quick questions on that?
Councilmember Chavez, I'll start out. First of all, thank you for coming in very clear about the mission, outcome, principles, and goals. One of the things that always concerns us, and I understand that the legislature did have a statute and funded the whole water supply planning process. And one of the concerns we always have is that there are so many water management organizations. And if I ask our staff how many water management organizations, that there are about 8. Bowser,
Surface water?
Yeah.
Numerous surface water.
So many of those. And then, of course, if we're going to drill a well, we have to go to the public health and the DNR to get permitting and all of that. So please help us understand who is the enforcing body when you get to planning for water supply. We're the ones who deliver the service. We're the ones who are directly interacting with our citizens, and we know what the demand is when we're doing redevelopment or because we're already built out. But for us, the frustration is that there are so many water management organizations for surface, and then, of course, for groundwater supply, we have the DNR, who I believe has a very strong role in understanding the water supply of the state with all the different aquifers. And the Metropolitan Council is looking at water supply only within the metropolitan region?
Correct. And again, it's strictly a planning tool, not an enforcement regulatory. There's no legal authority for the Met Council to engage in that. So the honest answer to your question is, I don't see, at this point, there's no legal change to what you're experiencing, nor is there any forecasted at this point.
And we also know that it's very hard to even sift through all the water management folks, and even to try and say, can you take all of those and bring it down to 1 or 2 organizations? I don't think that's ever going to happen.
I don't know.
And so that's it. The other part for us is the housing piece, which is part of this.
Right.
And when we look at housing, housing is not necessarily regional, and looking at the factors that the Met Council looks at in terms of what your housing stock is going to look like. Because we do this here in Burnsville, we've always looked at our inventory. And tonight we're going to have another updated inventory supply on the single-family part of it. But when we look at housing options, and I think one of the factors, and Jenny, you can correct me if I misspeak with this, I believe one of the factors is looking at our businesses, and because we have a lot more retail and service, it has been brought to our attention that we needed more affordable housing. Well, we believe we have a lot of affordable housing already in Burnsville. And we also know by just anecdotally and just speaking to our business owners, the people who work in Burnsville, whether it's in our service, retail business, or small business, and also in our large manufacturing, come from all over the metro area. So there are no boundaries with regard to. But I think for us, we look at a balanced housing stock, from multifamily to single family to senior housing. So we try to look at all of that. And also, there's another factor to the way that we look at that, and is that it's the service that we provide in terms of public safety. So can you help us understand, when you look at housing options for the region, what are some of the factors that we have to be cognizant of?
Well, as the co-chair of the Housing Policy Plan Working Group, I think you just nailed one of the key factors to be considering is the job mix in your community. Something to be, and I tease people and my clients, and I trust this space, that as a lawyer, if you allow me to define the definitions, I can win any argument. So when I heard you use the term affordable housing, whenever I engage someone in that conversation, I'd like to somehow pause a little bit and say, can you tell me what you mean by it? When you choose to use that word affordable housing, are you using it in the regulatory, enforcement, statutory, legal definition, or are you using it more of a generic of that housing is affordable, depending upon what income bracket you're talking about? What I might characterize, what I heard the mayor say, is more of what we call mixed income housing stock. So when I'm using affordability, I'm not using it in the narrow legal sense. So it's always important to pay attention as to what's the nature of that conversation. What I heard the mayor say was a key word is balanced. Mm-hmm. That's a key factor. When I was serving in the Egan Planning Commission and also at the County Planning Commission, one of my mantras has been a really balanced mixed income community for housing thrives because it's just a product portfolio. You have residents that can stay in your community and they can move up and down that housing portfolio as their lifestyle changes. Why move to Egan? They don't need to. If you're working here, live here, let's stay here. So that's a main driver, no pun intended. So it's a cluster of things, and as far as job centers, employment centers, the match of mix of housing with income levels, education centers, proximity, and then the transportation to the extent that you can move those residents easily among work, education, and housing. That's a challenge, I know that. But those are the key factors we're looking at.
Okay. Housing as we see it, and my colleagues can also correct me if I misspeak, we don't see it as a regional issue. So does the Met Council see it as a regional issue?
Short answer to your question is yes.
Okay. Can you elaborate?
Sure.
Because if it's regional, and we're very parochial in the way that we look at it because we're looking at our community and the balance of that stock with education and with our work, with our businesses and our job.
Sure. A couple of examples. One is I heard the mayor use the metaphor or the explanation about people, regional residents traveling to Burnsville for work. They do not live in Burnsville. Mm-hmm. You've just opened the door for a cross-border topic. Mm-hmm. I live in Egan. I do global practice from my global headquarters on the second floor of our house in Egan, but I also travel to St. Paul, Minneapolis, all the burbs. Okay? So the way we view it is, and I'll just say this from my perspective, I think it's safe for me to be a little bit presumptuous with you here that for most of our residents, at least for me, a major investment in my portfolio personally is a residence. If that's the case, I think we should be paying attention to do what we can to really leverage, mitigate risks to that investment. Am I talking about all kinds of regulatory controls? No. A, it's not realistic. B, it's not going to happen. It's more of what can we do to collaborate with your city and other cities to make sure that those investments are really leveraged, protected, and you're able to migrate easily back and forth across borders for work, entertainment, education, whatever.
Okay. Bill, did you have a question?
Counsel, I didn't quite understand the answer. And,
Thank
as
you.
a
I
lawyer,
thought I was
as a
the only
lawyer as well, and I've understood your other answers. So what the mayor said, and I agree, I think sort of the gist is we, based on our philosophy, we're always a little worried about mission creep
Right.
of the Met Council. And I think the mayor's been sort of saying that, trying to say it in a very nice way. And
Don't mess with our housing stock.
no. So, I mean, it's not that I don't think you have a valid point about being concerned about community-to-community housing, but we just see it as we're protective of what we, from a local level, as to what we think we can do to help our citizens or protect our community, et cetera, as to our housing stock by ordinance and other events. And so that's really the gist of it. I mean, maybe what you say is accurate about sort of regionally being concerned, traveling community to community. But the truth is, from my standpoint, I have a law office in Egan, but I don't worry about what Egan's doing. I have a house in Burnsville. I don't worry about what Egan's doing for their housing stock. I'm sure they're locally doing it well. So really, but the gist is, from our standpoint, with all due respect, it's just worried about long-term mission creep. So that's all.
Okay. Councilmember Sherry, Mary?
Well, just to add to that, I had a couple of thoughts. That was my thought exactly. I mean, I didn't find in your long answer a short, succinct response to our concerns. So, if I may use a couple of examples. So, if we were to have, let's just say, take a particular property in town that had space to put in a very large retailer, as I'm hearing you saying, to add to our existing strong retail base, that the Met Council then would expect us to offer more housing for the people that would be employed there. Another question is, if I'm not mistaken, that Southdale is in the city of Edina.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I haven't noticed a lot of housing there for the people who work in retail in Southdale. I think that what I'm sure you're well intentioned, but at least for me, and I've lived in this community as it has grown from 20,000 to its present population of 61,000 today, I think that what you're doing is really very arbitrary. You're trying to line something up so that if X happens, then Y must happen. I'm more of a free market person. I think that if X happens, maybe it's X plus 1. I really rankle at this what's happened where we in good faith have provided a lot of affordable, let's just not call it anything else, housing. And I do not want to be under pressure should we land another big retailer, and I think there's a good chance of that we would have to provide more.
We don't have any more land.
Well, but we don't have any more land, but we do have some properties that could.
They could come and ask for a PUD amendment.
Well, I'm talking about retail properties that could phase out and newer, bigger, better things come in.
Yes. But we don't have any R1 or residential zoning left in the community. Yeah.
We don't.
So, and that's part of it.
I think.
Okay.
What is what's the home threshold for affordable housing on single family? What's the dollar?
Income, I think it's.
No, the dollar value of the house that qualifies it as affordable. I can't remember what the number was.
I don't remember off the top of my head either.
Purchase, but we just got a message.
I think it's income level, correct, Pat? It's in the metropolitan median income for families of two is at 46.
Researchers, we look at two different levels. One is income, of course, families of 4 or more. But we also, I think what Councilman Keeley is referring to is the median home price, which you can discuss, what is affordable, what isn't. During the boom of the early 2000s, it was 211, 212, somewhere around there. I think it's probably down in the high 180s somewhere about now.
And Burnsville's current average housing price is
149 is our median.
Yeah.
So when you look at
we
it,
actually have a lot of qualifying single-family homes that fall below that particular threshold, aside from the fact that we have, dense housing options, apartments.
Yeah. So for us, because we're always looking at our housing stock and our inventory and everything, trying to balance all of those things. my hope is that the Met Council will take that into consideration when, what is it, in 7 years when we have to again submit our comprehensive plan. 5 years, that's right. In 5 years, we have to submit it. That's right, because we have to submit it and then we get adopted. Yeah, it's every 10 years we get an adopted one.
Yeah.
So in 5 years, when we go through this exercise again, because we had a lot of going back and forth with regard with housing stock, and that's why it's a bit of a concern for us because of that particular issue, and especially when you just pointed out what our average home is in Burnsville. So
It's the median, it's not the average, it's
yeah,
the median.
median, yes.
Yes. Our average is around 190 is about what the average home is that we've been using. It's kind of our typical family home. So
Yeah.
just to clarify.
Yeah. Dan?
Well, I just wanted to thank Councilmember Chavez because it wasn't his own personal necessarily opinion that he was representing here at
No.
the table, but that of the Greater Met Council. And of course, we have our opinions on some of the things, and that's good government, good debate, and certainly we want that feedback to go back with you. And I don't think we have a big affordable housing challenge here for us. I think
No.
from a planning standpoint, as Mayor Couts pointed out, we don't have much land left to work with, so it's more redevelopment and the great Northwest for us, which is the Minnesota River Quadrant, but that's many years off in the
Right.
future.
Yeah.
Right.
When we are all in, Met Council and City Council retirements
Yeah.
homes.
So we appreciate your coming in, but at least you understand our concerns.
Yes?
And when you sit in your committee, that your constituents hear that, because for us, it's in 5 years we'll be submitting our plan, and tonight we're going to be hearing the last housing study that was done this year for us.
Okay.
So thank
right.
you.
Thank you for humoring me. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it, though. And,
Thanks for your service on the council.
well,
too.
you're welcome. And
Representing-
please
And
feel free.
congratulations for being reappointed.
Thank you
Well,
very much.
Yeah,
Please feel free to reach out. I do mean that.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the review of our housing survey. And that's going to be presented by Jenny Faulkner, and our Community Development Director, and our planning intern, Laura Holy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I hope you can see it on the screen that we can't see. Is it up on this screen
Yep.
here? Okay, perfect.
Yep.
I'm going to give the brief introduction and the summary, and then I will,
They don't
we could have the PowerPoint up on, thank you.
there.
There we go. Okay. Excuse me.
Thank you, Laura. Nicely done, your report.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's well written also.
Yes,
Thank
it
you.
is. Very interesting.
Laura's a graduate student at the Humphrey Institute, and we don't have a planning intern every year, so we kind of lucked out this year. We had some work that we desperately needed to get done, and we had an opportunity to bring her on board for this summer, so
Yeah.
thanks to her. So the purpose of our housing study, I just want to run through a little bit of that. We, as you mentioned, Madam Mayor, we've done a housing study about every 8 years, it seems, historically, 93, 97, 05, and 2013. And what we're trying to do is track conditions of neighborhoods over time. We're not targeting a specific property, but it helps the staff in making decisions maybe about where our resources can be spent or what grant programs we may want to apply for. I believe, I wasn't here, but I believe this goes back to the Weed and Seed program that was instituted in the late 90s. So it certainly has been helpful in the past, and hopefully as GIS data has become much more readily available, easier to use, we can combine it with other data that we have to help inform your decisions.
Well, it was interesting in reading this report and the Weed and Seed program because it was the Vista View area and also over by what's now over on Williams Drive, where that apartment building is.
Sure.
That's now Cedar Grove. Is it Cedar? What is it called?
Off of Williams Drive,
And Penn.
like Penn Avenue,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, so and then
Stone
it
Grove.
came right up, Stone Grove.
Yes.
And then it came all the way up to Neal,
Correct.
but Vista View, that whole area. So it was interesting to see Vista View area is still in need. But we cleaned up some of the crime in that area during the weed and seed.
That's correct. So Laura will go through some of that. If you're okay, I'll
Yeah.
click through the slides for you. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to start off just by walking you through the methodology of how this study was done. I started surveying beginning of June, and it went all the way through the end of July, and I covered over 11,000 homes in the city of Burnsville, which was over 326 residential subdivisions, and this included all single-family and single and attached homes. It was rated based on appearance from the street view, so anything that could be seen from the street, if that included a side yard or a backyard, that was included, but anything from walking or driving in view was rated upon. So the subdivision condition rating is the average of all the homes in that subdivision, and that's how the number in the report is shown. So for evaluating, scores went from 1 being the best, newest, and 5 being it needs in replacement or non-existent. So the criteria that I looked at every house was the roofs, window, paint, trim, garage, driveway, and landscaping. And every single one of those criteria was ranked based on the 1 to 5 scale. And then like I kind of said before, is 1 is the newest, 2 is in good condition, relatively new, no chips, no cracks, looks very nice. 3 is average, so maybe not new, but still in good condition, really fair. 4 needs a little repair, noticeable wearing. This might include maybe a cracked driveway or wear on a roof, or kind of noticeable, needs a little updating. And then 5 is needs replacement or non-existent. So an example of this would be maybe a house has a dirt driveway instead of a real paved driveway, or missing part of a roof or something like that.
We saw some of those.
So we classified 2 main categories, which followed steps from past studies, which is a target area and a watched area. The target area took the top 15% of the highest scores of all the subdivision. These subdivisions are in the highest need of repairs, but as you can see, the average score was 2.64. So that's right in between good and average, so nothing too extreme. From looking at past studies, you can see 3 subdivisions that have been consistently in this target area since 1993. For the watched area, this is the second highest, the second or the top 15%. Yeah, so overall it includes the top 30% of all housing, of all the housing stock. In the watched area, these are homes usually in signs of wear. The average score is 2.55 to 2.63, and only 1 subdivision since this study has began has continuously stayed on the watched area list. This is a GIS map showing the city of Burnsville, with the red highlights the target areas and the yellow highlights the watched areas. You can see some subdivisions are larger than other subdivisions. Some of those cluster many subdivisions, so not every big area is just 1 subdivision.
The red is what?
The red is the target area, so
And
that's
the yellow is?
watched area. So the red is the top 15%, and then the yellow is the next 15%.
Interesting, the
that was
cluster
highlighted.
down in southwest Burnsville.
I think that's also interesting because those lots tend to be larger, so that might be kind of skewing the perception of the map a little bit, because those lots are so big on such a map, where maybe
Here.
Yeah, it's
up
one-
here are a lot
right.
smaller lots.
Yeah. We didn't get, I'd like to, a copy of that map.
Yep. The map
Please.
is just recently finished, so hopefully you all,
We can email it.
yes, you all get this copy. So the results. The city of Burnsville has an average condition rating of 2.43, so right between good and fair. The standard deviation is 0.473, meaning 68% of the subdivisions land between 2.955 and 2.008. This is a pretty big range, right between 2 and 3. Compared to past studies, this is a pretty wide range, meaning the scores really are scattered kind of along the condition ratings. And then 108 homes, or not homes, 108 subdivisions. No, homes. 108 homes were scored at 3.5 or higher, so this is less than 1% of all the homes in the city of Burnsville.
Essentially 1% of our housing stock had
Really,
conditions.
Yes,
really bad.
yeah. And 3.5 is needs repair is just above average.
But
So-
from 11,108.
Yeah.
So let's make sure everybody.
Yeah.
11,000 homes, 108.
A little less than
Received
Yeah. Yeah.
above the 3.5 threshold. So just to compare to past studies in past years, you can see more homes were evaluated, or the most homes were evaluated this year, along with the most number of subdivisions. The average score did go down compared to 2005, meaning the homes are becoming better condition, or getting better conditions scores. So, because 1 is the best and 5 is in need of repair. You can see number of homes over 3.5. If you look at all of the scores, or all of the homes over all of the surveys, it actually has gone down from 4% to 3%, and then 1%, with 2005 kind of being a unique study.
Which means that our people are paying attention to everything with regard to the improving their
Yeah,
homes.
that's a big reduction. That's
Yeah,
75%
yeah, which is
down.
really great. And then with the property maintenance ordinance that we put in place,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to continue to improve the quality of the
Right.
neighborhoods.
Right. So some limitations to this study is it acts as a snapshot in time. The minute these houses were surveyed or scored, if maybe a week later they replace their driveway, it's not taken into account into the study. The averages for the subdivisions are not weighted, so a subdivision of 3 homes is seen as equal to a subdivision as 103 homes. Past studies only looked at homes 15 years or older, thinking that was the concentration of maybe homes with issues, where this study encompassed all of the homes, single-family homes in the city of Burnsville, to kind of get an overarching look at the city housing stock. Past studies also included some townhomes and some fourplexes, which we thought this study did not need because they're managed different, they're maintained differently. Really, homeowners assess or fix the criteria for single-family houses, where townhomes and fourplexes might have associations, and they're all kind of graded different. So we thought that was a whole separate category in itself. So, in conclusion, Burnsville has a very healthy housing stock. Not every home in the target or watched area has a high score because it is an average. Homes with high condition ratings are greatly dispersed throughout Burnsville. So, and not every home has a high condition rating for every criteria. Maybe just the roof is in poor condition in a home, or it's not like every condition is getting a 5 on a home. 7 subdivisions that have always been classified on the target or watch list in past studies are no longer on those lists. They have moved off. And then Burnsville has shown to continually improve the condition of ratings since the study began, with a lower overall condition score.
And lastly, as I said at the intro, before we'll stand for questions, is that this data can be used certainly by our code enforcement folks to highlight those targeted or those watch areas if we want to put emphasis on those. We can use this data now that it is in our GIS system in conjunction with other data, as I stated, to guide in decision making, and certainly can help with other programs or grants as those opportunities may arise. So it certainly is something that's, like Laura said, it's a snapshot in time of the quality of our housing stock, and we can gauge it over time. So that's been very helpful for us. And we'll stand for questions.
Yeah.
Well, actually, first of all, I'd like to just give a comment because I was here for the 93 survey and then everything that up to today. And in just really looking through all of this, what I really like is that because one of the success factors or themes that we focus on is our neighborhoods. And that's where we started to really look at the housing condition and the condition of our inventory. And to see that it continues to improve throughout from 1993 to 2013, which means that thank you to our staff to continuously, because we really focused on the neighborhoods to make them viable, because that's one of the things that we say in the our end statement for neighborhoods, make sure that they're viable and they're continuously improving. And so I look at these numbers in each of these neighborhoods, and I see that that's happening. So another tool that we have just given staff and has proven to be very useful is the property maintenance code. That also is going to help with all of this. So thank you very much for doing a wonderful job, and Jenny, to you and the folks in inspection for all of that work. Thank you. I'm going to go to Bill, Dan, Mary, and
Go around the
Suzanne.
table if you want.
Why don't I just start over here then? Bill, go
I
first.
just
then.
want to say thank you very much. It was a job very well done to both you and other staff members that may help, but job very well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary?
It was very interesting. I really found it fascinating. I just hope that because it does show it shows a very positive view of the housing stock, but I don't want the public to misunderstand or to think that that lessens my concern anyway. I can't speak for the rest of the council about our need to do some code enforcement, because some of the things that you pointed out are definitely things that need to be fixed. Which leads me to a question for you, Jenny, and that is, you mentioned that there are programs and grants possibly available if somebody gets, say, a notice of a big ticket item that has to be taken care of, and they're looking for help. What criteria or how would the city decide if there was money from one of these programs or grants? How would there be a system for identifying true need?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sherry, members of the council, we have lots of resources, or I shouldn't say lots, but a handful that we refer people to that we come across that need help, that don't have the resources to do that. Our biggest ally is the Dakota County CDA, Community Development Agency. They administer our housing finance programs, as I'll call them. So they have a home improvement loans that help low and moderate income folks.
Okay.
An example would be if you're a family of three and you make $58,000 or less, they're able to help you with some kind of loan. There's other criteria too. They also have rehab loans, which are forgivable loans, which are for people who make 30% or less of the median income, so even lower incomes yet. There are resources there to help people. There's fix-up loans, which can help a household up to $96,000 with an income of $96,000. So there's, depending on the type of program that you have, there's various income limitations. We at the city have a policy regarding property repair expenses, where we occasionally help them as a very last resort after we have proof that they can't get private financing, evidence of continued code violations where we know it's absolutely necessary, and we help them through the assessment process over time. So there's a handful of resources out there for people of all incomes.
But they would be qualified prior to getting the money.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
And are we using, we had a CDBG loan fund at one point, but then it wasn't used as much. Did we reallocate some of those funds?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, some of the funding for these programs is CDBG money. We have some funds allocated. I think it's in maybe the 10 to 15,000, not as much as it
Yeah.
used to be.
Yeah.
And there's other resources that the CDA has too that they put into this.
Okay, great. Suzanne?
Well, I just want to say I also found the study very interesting and very well done. Thank you very much for all the time you put into that. And I want to thank Mary just for bringing up, I was going to ask the same thing, how can folks get help? So I'm glad that our residents can hear that there are programs out there that they can find out about to see if they qualify to get help with some of these large, expensive jobs that need to get done. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Dan?
Thank you very much. Very enlightening study, and like the mayor, I want to get a hold of that map too. And I have a question. Let's say I'm a homeowner. Can you flip that slide up?
Let's see here.
The map slide?
Which one?
Yeah, the map.
I got to do this the old-fashioned way, sorry.
Previous.
No,
Reverse and then remote.
There.
There.
no, it's not working.
So
Don't do that.
let's say I'm a homeowner in either the yellow or red, pick one, and I take very good care of my home, and it's in great condition, and I think my neighbors are pretty well too, but I've got a yellow or red designation that's surrounding the whole neighborhood. At what percentage of the homes within that designated color area does it take to trigger it getting yellow or getting red?
Well, it's a percentage of all the subdivisions is what's considered the target area or the watch area. So not every home in the target area has
Right.
that. I think the break was at 2.64. So not every home in the target area has that score or higher. That's the average for the whole subdivision. That's not a personal home score.
Right.
And then the target area is taken by the top 15% of the subdivisions with the highest scores. So it can change every time you do the study, and those breaks can change every time you do the study because it's a percentage of all the subdivisions.
And what percentage?
It's the top 15%.
Okay, so
Let me,
go ahead.
maybe I can help answer the question.
Okay.
Because it's an average, if there's 10 homes in a neighborhood versus 100 homes, the neighborhood that has the red area, it may only take one house to cause
Drag
such a
the
shift
average.
in the number. Correct, versus that same score in a neighborhood of 100, it'll take 10 homes to have the same effect on the score. So it depends on the number of homes that are in that subdivision, and they're all different.
The reason I ask is for a homeowner that may be in one of these
Yeah.
areas, I don't know how this map and this whole process would have an effect necessarily on, because I have a feeling that this is somewhat relative to the map
Real
I
estate.
saw of the real estate values, where the ones that are a little above even or a little below, because it looks pretty familiar. So it's probably not in stark contrast or is going to cause any valuation shifts, because it does seem to be reflecting the
Yeah.
same thing. But it certainly does call attention to the area.
Yeah.
And to Mary's point, and for us to be able to use this information to be able to help that area
Yeah.
by calling attention to the ones that need the work and providing information on tools that are available to help them improve that, it can obviously have an impact on this map, which would probably have a corresponding impact on that valuation of the neighborhood map based on those comparables. One foreclosure in a very nice neighborhood becomes a very low comparable, and it drags everything else down.
Yeah.
That's a similar house because it's the only data on the books. And that's one of the flaws, in my opinion, of the real estate valuation appraisal market is they don't necessarily always use the best or the broadest brush of
Yeah.
comparables to get a real
Yeah.
average, rather than just picking a few that have activity, which happened over recent years. But anyway, thank you very much. Very good job.
But, I see this in two ways, and I'm going to go to Bill and Mary. When you have this map, it might be a motivator for the folks to say, we need to clean it up so that our values can improve.
And
then get off
potentially
the
help
target and-
neighbors to help their neighbors do it, so it can help the neighborhood.
Yes.
And I think this is a trigger to motivate some real neighborhood involvement in making a neighborhood better.
Bill and then Mary.
I'll pass.
Mary.
Well, just to that point, could we have the map and the this list
Did you
of
find your
scores?
neighborhood?
Yeah, I did.
You put dots on.
Yeah. But could we have the map and the attachment, the scores, either in a separate document that that people could access from the website, or somehow so they could get at it, just to Dan's point, so they could take a look at this? I think that people would find it very interesting, and I think that they may not, they may not be aware of the other conditions in their neighborhood. But I'd like that, I know they can get to it through our, our background for today, but boy, that's a long path. So if you could see that we can somehow get that, that'd be great.
We can put it, Madam Mayor, members of the council, with our comprehensive plan documents. We have other planning documents under the planning department and other studies and white papers I think we have out there, so we can certainly
Okay,
put that.
thank you.
No problem.
Good. Any other questions? But nicely done. I always love looking at this because you can see progressions.
Right.
So it's nice to know that it gets better. Some that are still targeted, but
Well, Madam Mayor, if I could point out on that map where we have some red and we have
Yes.
some yellows,
yeah,
we are doing major street construction
in those
in
areas.
some of those areas, either this year, we're doing some now. Yep. thanks,
Right in
Penny, right in
the
there.
Vista View area. It's it's all around 5 and
Yep, and next year, I know we're going to
5
be
and
doing
Parkway.
over another section on the other side of town. So I think this always helps. We always say it does, and I believe it does. So
does.
It does help. So
yeah,
Thank
And-
you.
yeah.
All of that.
Heather.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, and there's kind of two other pieces to just kind of keep in mind to the point about, the work that we need to do. As you heard Ms. Faulkner and Ms. Holy say, not all of the types of properties that we have are covered in this report.
Yeah.
And so there are areas that we need to be focused on as
Yes.
well. The other piece is when you look at those scores in the detail, you'll see that not all of these are comparable from one year to the next, because there have been some neighborhoods in addition that were not looked at in previous studies.
Yeah.
And so those things are just things to keep in mind as we're looking at
Yeah.
how we use the data as well.
Yeah, because some of those neighborhoods were newer, and so they weren't in that 15-year.
Right.
That's the reason why. So, but yeah.
I just want to clarify the point earlier that Heather brought up. I think it's a valid point. In this report, our median value of a home, owner-occupied homes, is 149, but our average is about 190. I believe is what you
Yeah,
said.
yeah. The difference between what median price and average price.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Average can be swayed by a lot of things.
Yeah.
Median is pretty much.
Okay. Nicely done.
What it is.
Always good information. Maybe some folks might find it boring, but we like it. Really good stuff.
Thank you again.
And thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And good luck in school. You're back. You're back.
Yes.
This year.
Yeah. Okay. Next item. And this is going to be presented by our Director of Administrative Services, Dana Hardy. And this is the item that has to do with the modified special events policy to include handling requests maybe by benevolent organizations to use city assets. Welcome. This is your
Thank
first
you.
item.
It is.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Madam Mayor, members of the council, this evening I'm here to talk about benevolent organizations and their requests to use city assets. This item comes to you, let's see if I can do this without the remote. As a return item from the January 25th council work session, where council directed staff to develop a policy that would respond to the requests made by various benevolent organizations to use city assets. This evening, looking to receive direction from the council on modifying our city contribution to special or community events policy to include handling of requests made by benevolent organizations to use city assets. Before moving on into the discussion, I just want to pause for a minute and put some definitions around some of the terms that we're going to be using tonight, and there are two of them, benevolent organization and asset, can have different meanings in different contexts. So for purposes of this discussion, I just wanted to point out benevolent organization would be any person or group organized and existing for charitable, benevolent, patriotic, religious, recreational, social, civic, fraternal, or other nonprofit purposes. And assets would be anything that has value to the city. Examples, lands, building, equipment. So for purposes of this discussion this evening, when we refer to those terms, that's what we're referring to. There were, after the January 25th work session, there were a series of discussions that took place with city staff. They looked at the different types of requests and frequency of requests that we receive from benevolent organizations. One of the things that we found was that these requests really don't have one point of contact that they go to. They vary from department to department. It could come through the police department. It could come through the city manager's office. It could come through our parks department. So where these requests are funneling through and then the frequency of those requests really do vary. One of the other things that we looked at was what current policies do we already have in place that would benefit benevolent organizations, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the discussion. And then we also looked at what other cities, what our market cities or comparable cities, other cities in the metro are doing with regards to responding to requests to use city assets. And what we found is that our comparable cities do not have policies that specifically address use of assets. They're outside of some of the things that we'll get into with our city policies that already exist, which would be like reduced fees for using meeting rooms or things like that. One of the other things that we did was reach out to LMC and our LMCIT folks to look at the different risks that may be associated with allowing people to access outside of the organization to access our assets. What kind of concerns would we have to consider? What kind of risks would that expose us to? So we had good discussions with the attorneys and our risk management consultants at LMC. So not all of the requests that we receive, and I mentioned we do have some policies that we'll get into, but they don't always fit neatly within the lines of the policies that we already have established. So some of these requests that we're looking at, we'll take 3 examples. Number 1, a nonprofit would request to use our right-of-way to plant a vegetable garden. The produce would be used to be served in community meals. Or another example where a church requests free access to the city's compost site. Volunteers within that group were removing yard waste for maybe their shut-ins, and they needed a place to dispose of that yard waste, but do not have the fees to pay for that disposal. And then example number 3, a community group requests the city fire department fill a dunk tank for a community fundraising event. So when these types of requests come in, there's really a number of factors that we should take into consideration. And one of the big factors is a public purpose. Purpose means that that there needs to be a benefit to the community as a body, and it directly needs to relate to the functions of government. So when we receive these requests, we really need to pause and ask some questions about what purpose does the request serve. We really put it through a public purpose test, so to speak. One of the things would be to say, would the community, with this request, does the community as a whole benefit from it? Is there a statute, a state statute that specifically allows this request? Or to be, or permits the request or the expense to be expended. And is the primary objective benefiting a private interest, or is it a public interest that's being benefited? One of the other things we need to look at is equity. How does the city determine who gets to use the assets? How will those be allocated? If you do for one, you do for all, where do you draw the line? And then are we making policies based on, or making decisions based on policies based on written documents, which really ties into the next factor, which is consistency. When we receive requests, are we handling, because we said they're coming in not with one point of contact, but from various places within the city. Are we handling those requests with some consistency? And can we tie it back to written documentation In the event that something were to happen and a claim would come out of that, then the city would remain protected under the statutory immunities. Another factor to consider is cost. There is a cost. For example, if we have staff that needs to go and open up the city compost site, there's a cost associated with that. If there are resources that are being dedicated for or being used already for serving the city core services or projects, taking or redirecting those assets away from that service or that project may cause service delays or impacts. So there are costs that are associated with that. That could also result in increased overtime cost as well. There are, as I mentioned earlier, there are examples of policies that are already in place within the city that do benefit benevolent organizations. For example, we do allow reduced fees or a reduction in fees for using our facility. Benevolent organizations also have the opportunity to reserve our City Hall community meeting rooms and our council chambers at reduced costs. And then there are also policies that have to do with sponsorships and city contributions, that if you meet specific criteria as dictated in those policies or outlined in those policies, there is a benefit to the organizations that do meet the criteria listed there. Taking all of that into consideration, staff weighed pros and cons of several different options. The first option that we looked at was we could expand the city contribution to community events policy to allow benevolent organizations to use city assets. The requesting organization would then pay all the direct costs associated with the asset being requested. The second option is very similar to the first option, which would allow the benevolent organizations to use the city assets. However, in this case, the requesting organization would pay a percentage of the direct costs associated with the asset being requested. And then the third option that was looked at was not expanding policies currently to include the use of assets by benevolent organizations, and I can qualify that further in a moment. So with each option, there are challenges and there are benefits. If we recall option number one, allowing the use of assets but paying all the direct costs, the benefits are obvious. The city would help organizations provide services to the residents. The organizations do provide a public benefit serving the entire community or segment of the city's population. The challenges associated with this option is that we would really need to establish criteria and be very specific with how we are making decisions to allow and allocate the use of that. And it would also require, a lot of manual intervention and could be administratively burdensome for staff to take that on. And then we're also opening the door to have increased competition for our already limited resources within the city, and it would it could have the potential of redirecting resources away from services that we're committed to providing already. And then a result of that would be a potential to increase the city's budget for overtime expenses related to either fulfilling the city core services or assisting in providing assets to the benevolent organizations. The second option, same benefits and pretty much the same challenges. However, when you're looking at maybe paying a percentage of the direct cost, there's even additional criteria, additional calculation, and additional administrative costs associated with carrying that out on an ongoing basis. So that would be an additional challenge for pursuing that option. And then the final option would be to not allow benevolent organizations to use city assets outside of our current policies. The benefits with that is that the city does recognize the important work that benevolent organizations do perform for the city and its residents, and there are policies that recognize this that already exist within the city. We do have the legacy events and community events policy that allows for sponsorship and assets to be directed to those different events if they meet that criteria. And then there are other current policies that we reviewed earlier, such as the reduced fees for the facility use. And in doing so, we would also see, we wouldn't necessarily have that increased competition for the use of the same assets, which would allow our staff to focus on core services and city projects that the council has deemed a priority. One of the drawbacks with that is that one of the challenges with that is that benevolent organizations do provide a public benefit that serves either the entire community or a segment of the community that the city may not otherwise have the opportunity to reach. So there could be a missed opportunity there, or a missed opportunity to educate citizens on issues facing the city. After weighing all of the options, staff is recommending the third option, to not expand the current policy to include use of city assets by benevolent organizations. And I'll further qualify that by saying use of city assets, however, would continue to be permitted under the city's contribution to community events policy as they qualify for legacy events or community events, or as addressed by other existing policies. And with that, I'll hand it back over to the council for discussion, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Councilmember.
For me, I'm
Bill.
for number 3. I was for number 3 in January or whenever this came up before. I don't see why we would. I see no persuasive argument. I've been persuaded differently to change my mind. And as to some of the cons, can you imagine trying to come up with an additional criteria to quantify what it would cost for overtime and city staff, and how that would relate to trying to enter into an agreement with some benevolent organization? I mean, it just further convinces me that number 3 is the correct way.
Okay. Mary?
I agree. I think that the complicating factors are overwhelming, more than I realized until I read the report. So thank you very much, because it seems like it would be such a good thing, and it would. I think without a budget set aside for this kind of thing,
You never know what it's going to be.
no, you don't. And I also, there's another problem that I think is highlighted, and that is, how do you draw the line? I think that was a term you used, Dana, that how do you say this organization can have it, but another one can't? So I think that our existing policy does seem to please people. I mean, I have not heard any complaints.
Suzanne?
I agree.
Okay. Dan?
I agree. I mean, it's very tricky and complicated to come up with a policy. And I remember some situations that came up where organizations that fell under the benevolence definition requested use or a reduced rent or a free rent at the BPAC to have a community type of deal. And I was reading our policy to try and see if those that I can remember would somehow fit under here, and they kind of do, but I think it depends on the situation, and that's the problem. You can't really put your finger on a criteria, and I think if I remember right, this came up at our all-day work session as a result of we were getting requests, a lot of requests, and staff brought that to our attention. We said, well, let's study it and see if we can come up with an alternative or some way to handle these things so we can be responsive to the community requests for utilization of city assets at a free or reduced fee. And I think what we found is it's next to impossible to come up with a policy that will address all the various types of requests that we get. And so what are we left with doing? back to the same, we're back to square one. And if we got a request from an organization, it would really have to fit within our policy number 1.027, city contribution to community events. And otherwise, we would not provide any support of any kind, I guess.
Yeah, this has come up often, and we always address it. For me, we worked so hard to have the policy that we have now. And it works, and it's clear to everybody in the community. And we've had discussions around this many times, and it becomes a slippery slope if we go to the other direction. When I say slippery slope, I mean that people in our community don't know what the policy is. But if they see a city asset being used by someone else, they think that our staff or somebody is doing something irresponsibly. Or why are you using city assets in a way that you should not be? Why are you using taxpayer assets and certain things? And I think that becomes quite messy when people, because they don't know that we're following a particular policy. And that's to everybody's point. It's how do you write a policy that's going to get to all of that, and then having people understand. I think today, everybody understands that we have this policy in place that there will be a city contribution, but you have to be one of our legacy, and it's a 50-50. And so it is. So I agree with everyone. I think it's good for everybody to understand that we do have a very conservative policy, and everybody will understand that that's what it is. Bill, you had more to add?
I was just going to agree with that. I mean, we had some organizations like the Burnsville, the Historical Society, and other organizations. It is, love all those people, love all the things that a lot of these organizations do. The problem is, again, it is a slippery slope. Unfortunately, to open the BPAC or things like that, I mean, it costs the city money, costs resources, costs staff time, et cetera, and that's just not recognized always by some of the folks that ask for the
Well, and it's
use.
really good for any of us, because I've had someone ask if they could use one of our trucks to haul stuff. Can you imagine allowing someone to use, with the city logo, using a truck?
And then it gets an accident.
And
Steve was.
that just doesn't,
He's
and
terrible.
for all of us to say, no, that we can't, the city assets are to be used by city staff. Heather?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, the other thing to remember is that we do currently allow some discounted rates in our facilities.
Absolutely.
And
That's-
that is something that you all consider annually as a part of the
Yep.
budget process as well. And so you'll see in your fee schedules where we have discounted rates. And so that's something just to be cognizant of, too, as we go through the budget process. And so this direction that we're hearing from you all will allow us to really clarify
Yeah.
the existing policies so that we're not expanding it beyond what we already have, which are some of the designated events, as well as, there are other community events that we have done in partnership, some of the, hazardous waste days and things like that, where we have those covered in other policies. And so but there were some things that were not contemplated in those policies, and so this helps give us some direction. So, thank you.
Dan?
Just one clarification. You did check our sister city group and/or other cities around us, and no one had any policies in this area?
No one had any policies in this area outside of facility use, reduction in rates.
Yeah.
The response was,
They
as
don't
a
do it.
general practice, they do not do it.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the day, Dan, when there was a misconception that city staff was misusing city vehicles and assets and letting people borrow it. This was back in the 80s and 70s, and I think from that point on, people just said, no more. Yeah. And I don't know if it was true at that time or not, but you don't see any city assets being used anymore. If it ever was, or if it was anecdotal information, but that's the perception. But once you have that perception, it's hard to erase it.
Yeah.
So stay the course.
Thank you.
Very conservative. Stay the course.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Next is the Community Builders Award nominations. Michelle?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This year we received 6 nomination applications for the council consideration. Those applications are included in your packet, and staff is seeking direction for which of these applications you would like to consider for an award.
Mary?
I would not want to eliminate a single one.
They were also
They're
worthy.
wonderful. They're wonderful.
And they are
and
doing such great things in our community.
They are, and they're doing such a wide variety of things that I think that it was exhilarating to read the nominations, and so that's my opinion.
All of them.
I would like to see all of them.
I agree.
Okay. Bill? Dan?
Yes, I Cornerstone Copy, Daniel and Warren did what they do.
They give.
Every single request that comes through, any kind of benevolent request, they are right there, happy to help and contribute, their labor and their time and their materials to help an effort. I don't think they've ever said no, and they have to be one of the most generous companies in the city of Burnsville, and we have a lot. The Burnsville Lions Club, are you recusing yourself from that vote because you're a member?
Yeah, I'm recusing
Kidding.
myself for now because I'm a nominator. I'm nominating.
Are you the nominator?
Yeah, me and Beth Griebel. But wearing my other, community hat.
Sure.
But because of all the things that they've given to this community this last year and everything that they've done. The Lions Club, their one purpose is to raise money and give it back to the community. And they volunteer
fantastic.
in all kinds of things.
We've been
My
astounded
volunteer
lately
service
how much
with
they can
them
raise.
is, we're going to be
They're
picking up
impressive.
trash again.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
I think they are.
Yeah.
They could license their talent and or knowledge on how to raise money because they're a powerhouse.
We are a powerhouse of
fundraising.
making money.
Well, and I think as long as we've named names here, I think we should also mention the others, and that is Ramsey Boyd from Colonial Villa. And I haven't been inside, but I noted that our fire chief was the nominated Mr. Boyd. And from the outside, I can't believe the transformation of that property. It's amazing. And we also have Faye Finn, who's a volunteer with ISD 191 for the Brain Power in a Backpack program, and Bill Gans from 360 Communities, a volunteer, and Brian Salmon, Operations and Family Behavior Services, all of whom have made wonderful contributions
to the community. Okay, with that, that's who we're going to be.
I have your direction.
Thank you. Okay, roundtable. The 10K as a legacy event. I think Councilmember Keeley. Dan.
Yes. Mayor and fellow council members, I brought this up because back when, a couple of years ago, when it was, a couple of years ago when it was Tender Hearts, and then it became, I can't remember the name of the organization that had it, but well, it was back after that.
Interim. There was
For
an
a couple of
interim
years, there was
organization
an organization that was located out of. Anyway, it was still a legacy event at that time, and when the organizers changed, and the determination was to move the date from a traditional June into a date that fell within the fire muster. The suggestion was made at the time that it no longer needed to be a legacy because it was essentially part of the fire muster. And I have to admit, at that time, it didn't really dawn on me, or I didn't really understand the full implications of that. And I don't really think the implications are all that bad, except the event itself is operated by a separate board and governing body. It's not the fire muster that operates it. It's essentially a separate it's continuing to operate just as it did, by its previous organizers, by a group of individuals who are volunteering their time, who do all the organizing
And
work,
the
et cetera.
group now that is the 10K, what's the 501c3 for that? Or for
It's actually, the benefactor is the Boys and Girls Club. So the Heart of the City organization operates to benefit the Boys and Girls Club. So the 501c3 is actually the Boys and Girls Club. It's the Kids Feeding Kids program within that, but it's the Boys and Girls Club. So the group is called the Heart of the City Committee, basically, or 10K, Heart of the City 10K. I think there's some discussion, I know of some discussion that's going to take place about modifying the name to include Kids Feeding Kids, Heart of the City 10K, because that's the program under the Boys and Girls Club. That's the benefactor. It's sort of the brand of the benefactor outside of the Boys and Girls Club. But it still operates much like it did when it was the Tender Hearts or the other organization. But moving the date within the fire muster, it's essentially partnering with the fire muster to be an event within that umbrella, yet very separate.
Cost savings for you?
Absolutely. It's a cost savings for the city and the organizing group because there's existing public safety barriers and roadblocks and stuff. But there is some cost to do it because of the running routes and stuff. But this dawned on me, being under full disclosure, very involved in this. I'm on the organizing committee. That I think it still deserves the legacy designation because it's still a legacy event. And I will tell you that even though the partnership with the fire muster is wonderful, and there's discussions to see how that can be greatly enhanced, there's no guarantee that this event per se would always be part of the fire muster. I mean, we don't see it changing, but what if moving it to a summertime date ends up being in the best interest of the event? Well, then it detaches from that date range of the fire muster, and then it no longer essentially is deemed if it's not a legacy event, I don't know what we'd call it today, sort of the legacy event falls under the umbrella of that. So I believe it's in the best interest of the event to return the designation that it had, because I actually, as I think back, the fact that it lost it, I don't think was necessary. I think it was okay to do it, we did it, but I don't think it was truly necessary for the long term of the event. I believe that the event will be here for a very long time. I think the fire muster is here permanent. Art and all that jazz, I think it's here permanently, but it lost a year this year, and there's an uncertain future there. I think it's going to come back next year, and I certainly hope so. It's one of my favorite events. I loved it. The International Festival, I would assume, is going to be here for the long haul. Well, so is the Heart of the City or the Kids Feeding Kids 10K, and I think it needs to go back on this list. Doesn't matter if it doesn't really change anything. It'll still operate under the date range of the fire muster, but as it is now. But I think it needs to stay where it was, and I regret agreeing to having it pulled off because I don't think we did it any justice. We didn't harm it, but that's only because we're assuming that it stays part of the fire muster, and that was probably the assumption.
Yeah, and because it was at the time, if I remember correctly, it was a cost savings for the event because when you're under the fire muster and because it's a 50-50 split on all of those things.
Well, it would have been a 50-50 split if it just stayed on this list, regardless of the date being moved, or if the date moved or it didn't move. It was on the list as the Tender Hearts. We just changed the name and changed it from a half marathon to a 10K. So it already existed on the list. We just took it off because we moved the date under the fire muster, and it seemed logical to just make it a fire. But it really does operate separately. It just operates within the date range of the Fire Muster Festival. But there's no guarantee that will always permanently be that way.
Mary, because I think you'll have to take a look at how the bylaws of the fire muster and then you coming in and how that would be. And I think this will be something that staff might want to clarify because you'll be two different organizations under legacy events and how the the cost factor will affect you. I
It's
don't
the
know.
same by the sheer fact that we're operating under a date where the fire muster, we basically, and I think I'd put it in the words that Craig put it, we're sharing in the cost savings. I think that this organization's benefiting.
You just want to be
from the fire
you
musters
just want
already
to
existing,
retain
so.
legacy.
Absolutely.
But you don't. But the other part you're going to.
It could stay the same because it actually helps the city and the organizing event as well.
Heather and then Mary.
Madam Mayor, just as a roundtable item, my understanding is that we're trying to get a sense of whether or not you all would like staff to spend time evaluating this for you and bring it back to you as a request. And so
Just to see what the
I don't know
impacts
that
would
we're
be?
necessarily prepared to give you enough information for you all to be able to make a decision
Yeah.
tonight, but I just wanted to clarify that.
In my mind, it's as simple as returning it to where it was because it didn't really change a whole lot.
Mary.
My only concern would be that because earlier, as you said, that it could move into another part of it.
Yeah, there's not
But
a
then-
long-term contract to stay a part of.
Yeah, I know, but if
I mean,
it does, then you lose the cost-sharing advantage, and I don't want to see an increased cost to the city. Because
Yeah.
we would then have to pay more of the sheriff.
Absolutely.
And that would be my only,
But that existed before it
I don't care, I
fell
want to go
off.
back,
I mean,
because we have the race, a good, successful race, with a lot of participants.
45% growth this year.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I mean, that's
And it
just
would get better
fabulous.
every year.
But I,
Yes.
but I don't, I want to see it continue, but I don't, whatever action we take, I don't want to see any risk for the city's cost to go up for that.
I think
Bill.
yeah.
And I absolutely agree with Mary on everything she said.
Yeah, I think what staff is needing from us is direct staff to go back and come back and see what's the implication. And, in hindsight, looking at it.
It should never have been taken.
Yeah, but let's take a look and see what are those implications. But you should also take a look and say, there's a different board over, what are the policies of the fire muster with their board? And working with you, is there going to be, a relationship where they're going to say, yeah, it's okay, you'll be under and we'll.
Sure.
And I don't know whether you had to pay anything this year.
No, I think it's as simple as it's kind of like mutual aid.
Yeah.
We bring something to the table.
But the people
and
who
we're
are on the
getting
board
something.
now.
Yes.
This is why I think what I'm
Well, and the
what
previous
I'm
board.
gathering is you're just trying to position the board now is working very well with you.
Yes.
And,
Right, there's no guarantee that future boards will.
Yeah, when you're
They might
saying,
say,
yeah.
we got our own Saturday morning event, you're out.
or
I doubt it, but,
yeah.
you never
So
know.
let's direct staff to come back with what the implications are before we make a decision. Okay, Heather?
Thank you. We'll bring it back to you.
Okay, very good. All right. Reports. Bill, you have anything?
Nothing, Heather, do you think from those meetings or anything that you would think we should report?
Councilmember Coughlin, we did have a presentation from Para, so I think we have a better understanding of that, which we'll bring back to you all during the budget process about our pension liability and how that will change from the accounting standpoint, as well as they give us some additional information on the Affordable Care Act.
And Moody's standpoint as well, maybe.
Yes, Mr. Councilmember Coughlin, yeah, we will bring some of the information that we've learned through some of these events back in the budget process
Is
as
this
well.
with the LMC Policy Committee?
Yes.
Yeah,
The
because is that-
Fiscal Futures Policy Committee, we had a presentation from Para on the pension issues and the related rating agency implications on that, as well as on the delays associated with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act.
And some of the things that's coming through the federal laws
Yes.
as well, and the state? Are there any state statutes that are being changed?
For the
For Para?
affordable, for Para? No, this is the
All of the
implementations of
Affordable Care Act.
The GASB, the
Yeah.
Governmental Accounting Standards Board, has changed the way that they account for pension costs. And so what you're going to see is when our financial statements come through is you'll see a much higher pension liability. It's not a change in the liability whatsoever. All it does is it shows a difference in accounting. So there's going to be a lot of confusion and clarification that's going to be necessary. PARA has now worked through how they're going to do those calculations for us. Obviously, the state has an ability to, I mean, they're the ones who we have our pension funds with. And so I think they are now understanding what that change means. They've given us some numbers. We'll bring that back to you all as part of the budget process, as well as some key points for people to understand, for the public to understand as we go forward.
I think that's very key, that our citizens understand that the changes that's taking place is the accounting on the books from Gadsby, this is the government accounting board, and what they're telling us we need to do. So it's going to look a little different.
A lot.
And
There's a but there. I mean, right now, PARA's in conversation with the 3 credit rating agencies, but that could change. So it's more complicated than just accounting change. The rating agencies and PARA have not come to some determination, so that's in flux.
yeah, but what's key for our people to understand is that we are in good standing with all of our contributions into the fund. I think the bottom line that our people will want to know is that, are we funding according to state statute?
Madam Mayor, we continue to make all of our payments on time according to state statute
Yes.
and are meeting all of our financial obligations associated with our pension liability.
At the end of the day, that's all the citizens would want to know. But for us, it's all this complicated stuff that has to do with the changes with Gatsby as well as the rating agencies. But it's good for us to know. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Mary?
Well, I've been attending the Metro Cities Policy, Housing and Economic Development, and League of Minnesota Cities, Improving Local Economies, and Jenny has been my guardian angel on that. And so, I don't know, Jenny, is there anything you want to bring to anybody's attention?
Maybe just a couple things, and there is discussion, and it didn't, I know it rose up in the media about tax on warehousing, and there's some big proponents to get that changed. I think we would certainly be one of those, because we have a lot of businesses that do warehousing in the city from an economic development perspective. We're hearing a lot from the Met Council on their Thrive 2040, so they're keeping us in the loop on those items. And then the last thing that came up has to do with, and this actually made it through some committees last year, was a street improvement fee. So I think that's something that the council will probably take up as part of your legislative discussion. But the league committee is knee-deep into that and supportive of that. So more tools, especially as if levy
I think it's
limits.
Eden Prairie and Edina who's looking at that, right? Because they don't have those.
No, I think there's 76 communities that have adopted resolutions, but it's more so communities who don't have as a solid funding source for roads as we have, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, because I've heard from a lot of those folks and why they were asking if we would be supportive of.
I think our interest comes in protecting our interests in the future.
Yeah.
This year, for example, levy limits came out of nowhere and could have sideswiped our ability to fund our roads. And so I think we take the standpoint of we want to have tools available to us, but we're interested in still continuing on the way Burnsville has continued on, using the general levy, which we feel is more transparent in assessments, as our preferred option.
Yeah, not only transparent, but we've been doing so well with all of that, where the other communities have not done that, and that's so.
Indeed. Indeed. So then I-35W Solutions, Mac, would you change that I am no longer the
alternate?
The principal and.
I need to change.
Pardon?
I need to change this, you're saying?
Yeah, so on I-35, I'm taking Dan's place. He's going to be the alternate, and I'll be the regular attendee, and I'm attending my first meeting on Thursday. And Burnsville Savage, Elizabeth, I'll let you talk about that. There really wasn't.
You talk about it.
Well, just that there's a corridor study that's been going on, which I think is really interesting, and that the communications are terrific with the city of Savage as far as the work that's going on Highway 13, both on our side and their side. Their side's pretty much finished. I don't know. Was there anything else you'd want to add to that?
Steve?
Council, we were looking at tentative agendas. We're hoping to maybe December, January at the latest, bring that study to you so you can see it.
Okay.
A lot of the activity is in Savage, but it's certainly of interest to us because we do have some common intersections long-term, so.
Yeah, and the one big discussion that took place there is the signal lighting, and it's mostly in
Right.
Savage because 5 and 13 is going to flow
Right.
through after 2015. And then there's only one intersection for us that'll be signalized, and that's the one that goes into Menard. What is that?
Washburn.
Washburn. That'll be the only signalized. The other ones are all in Savage. Are there two? One on Lynn and one over on...
Yes, and they've been debating, MnDOT would like there to be one, and so
Right.
that will be a battle with Savage, obviously. Savage has given up pretty significant access along that corridor already, and so,
Right. Right, we have to protect our businesses along that corridor, and
Yeah, well, it's all of those, and the big discussion that we had to do with all of the trucks coming out of the Port of Savage
Right.
with the grain, where they're depositing grain for the,
yeah, they need access.
yeah.
And there's a safety issue because
Yeah.
in the past, when you had the signalized intersection at 101 and 13, there were gaps.
yeah.
Now there are no gaps because it flows through, and so pulling semis out with no gaps and trying to make turns eastbound are very difficult, and so that's becoming an issue that Savage is grappling with right now. So.
So that was very good discussion, and they're going to need our support with all of that, and
Yep.
when we have that discussion with MnDOT.
And then the Burnsville Community Foundation, I just attended a meeting this afternoon, and Ed Delmaro, who heads up the winter lighting, is about to contact
Start.
people and start asking for contributions. So make that in bold print, will you, John? Okay. And so we'll be starting that for the winter lighting. The ceremony will be at Nicollet Commons Park on Wednesday, November 27th. Is that right? Wednesday is the 27th. And Mr. and Mrs. Claus, we think will be there. We have to, get a message out to the North Pole. And so watch for that. This year, people who wish to make a contribution to the lighting can do so on the Burnsville Community Foundation website, burnsvillefoundation.org. You can pay by credit card. The last thing that I have to report is because the Economic Development Commission is on comes under, I'm the liaison there, is some sad news, and that is Rich Vanderland, who was a member of the foundation, also a very active member of the Economic Development Commission, very active contributor to the Burnsville Community Foundation, is near death. He's had a very, very serious stroke, and he's not expected to survive.
And he's in hospice now.
He is in hospice care at home. So we thank him for his wonderful service, and it's a very tough time and sad for all of the organizations. He's also been the
BA
founder,
191.
one of the founders of BA 191. One of the baseball fields is named after him, so that just gives you a sense of the range of the lives Rich has touched over the years.
Thank you. Suzanne?
On August 26th, the LMC had an Improving Service Delivery Policy Committee meeting. I was unable to attend. I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Albrecht. Would you like to comment on?
I think, and it touches over to our Metro City stuff, the initiatives that Burnsville is working on with building and some of our rental property stuff, most of that stuff is on track. There's a couple of items that the Metro City and the League are looking at doing, not as legislative policies, but actually engaging some of the state organizations directly, specifically some of the building code issues that we're having. And so those things are happening right now. The other things that are on our radars that are emerging issues is related to our administrative fines push, but it's more of a push to get the ability for cities to assess those fines and to kind of clean up the process. So kind of getting a bridge between the different types of cities, statutory or not, and what their abilities are. And so the league is kind of trying to take a middle position on it, not wanting to throw one classification of cities kind of under the bus with the legislature. So that's happening right now, and there's discussions on that, and they're carrying the torch, I think, on most of the initiatives that the city had been looking
Yeah,
at. So.
well, because we in Dakota County, and Jenny and I are on the task force, which have been for the last 2 years, and we found a way to look at our property maintenance, but because we are a statutory city and not a chartered city, we didn't have the authority to do any of those charges, and we couldn't. So we found a way within the law to do what we're doing. But we continue to push LMC to find a way for statutory cities to have more authority.
Madam Mayor,
Yeah.
if I can add to that for the benefit of the other council members too. What that would allow us to do is to have an administrative court process.
Yeah.
So that they can appeal the charge or the violation, and that there's more of a due process at a local level. Right now, we are charging for our time and for our inspections, which we have the statutory authority to do and the ability to assess for that. So this other process, and you've probably heard other cities have these kinds of things, and they do because they are charter cities, and we don't. So we just want a level playing field. The expectation, I think, from the public who's lived in multiple cities is that this is how they do it here and do it there. So they think we're all alike, but we're not.
And that's why when we hear citizens come in and they say, well, now they took us to court. Well, because we don't have the authority to have a court system within our jurisdiction. And what we were pushing for is to have it where we could partner with some of the other cities within Dakota County, and then we could have administrative court. And it could move around, or it could stay put, and we could just pay the fee for a retired judge to come and do the hearings. But we don't have that authority, therefore we have to go through the county court system. Okay. Yeah. So we'll keep pushing, but we've found a way to do what we need to do. Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Dan?
Metro cities, we have our last transportation and general government, Steve and I, on Monday, to wrap up our legislative agenda. MBTA, I'll have to defer to Mr. Albrecht, who was able to make the last meeting and I wasn't, for any updates.
I think really the big important update for Burnsville is, if you'll recall, the council approved an agreement for creating basically a bond board for the MBTA, which allowed MBTA to issue its own bonds. One of the tricky things about being MBTA is you're not a city.
Yeah.
And so rating agencies struggle with
They
how
don't
you
have the
classify.
authority.
Well, and also most of your funding comes from grants and federal
Yeah.
programs, and
Yeah.
so it's very difficult to assign a rating to someone who doesn't have solid assets that necessarily are more than what their expenditures are on an annual basis. And so the good news was the staff and Springstead worked very hard to get a good rating, number one. They also were able to get a CTIP grant, which substantially reduced and originally looked at about an $8.6 million bond down to under $6 million. And on top of that, then they were able to get very good rates because of the bond rating. And so a couple of really good things happened. Number one, they were able to reduce the length of the bond by 5 years, which helped get substantially better rates and everything for MBTA to build the new bus, for building the bus garage that's going in Egan. The thing that helps Burnsville out is, even though we are not bonding on their behalf, their bond, their $8.6 million bond, was going to be spread equally from a capacity standpoint amongst the city members.
The five
And so it counted against the city's cap. That's reduced now because they were bonding for less. And obviously they're getting better rates, and we can put more money into operating the service and less into debt service. So a lot of good things happened, and so MBTA feels very good about that, and they should.
So how, because for us, it's the full faith and credit of the city, and we have a tax base that we can pay for our bonds.
Well, and the cities are essentially guaranteed the bonds of
Yeah.
MBTA. So
And that's the piece that
Yeah.
we
it's
talked
part of our
about.
bonding board, correct?
Yeah. So,
But it's been very successful, and Springstead did a very good job of leading the MBTA through that process. And so,
yeah.
Are those revenue bonds?
What was that?
Are those revenue bonds?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think they're revenue bonds.
Yeah, but still. But it's spread throughout the
Yes.
the
Yeah,
5 cities.
we're not-
And the other big piece is we have new streets around MBTA, so you can drive there,
Yeah.
and the buses can get there without causing damage just from the city
Oh my
streets.
God! Or even for anybody to
Good.
drive over there.
Yes, so that's a good thing.
Down there.
Pepsi too. The Pepsi
Well-
isn't all shook up when it leaves the plant. Now.
That's right. Not busy.
There's all that. Yeah.
No explosions in the
Exactly.
trucks, right?
Okay. Okay. Anything else, Dan?
The garage has not met for fall yet, but I would expect that to happen next month. The Suburban Transit Authority had a meeting last Friday developing legislative agenda and the annual awards for legislators who have carried the water for the opt-outs. And I-35 is over to Mary, so that's all it would be.
Okay. Municipal Legislative Commission, we meet quarterly, so our meeting is coming up. Regional Council of Mayors, the big item that we talked about was senior housing, and throughout the metropolitan region, and we had a panel of different folks who are in the industry, developers and financiers, and looking at senior housing. And it's a trend. It's trending up. There are a lot of people looking at moving to senior housing, so they were looking at how those are financed and the need for some of that. So that was the big thing. Metro cities, we adjourned early, right, Heather? Because we finished all of our work, so there's nothing to report this month. And International Festival doing well, and it's not until next year. And for the Convention and Visitors Bureau, Jenny and I serve on that board. And right now, the big item that we're looking at is, one, all of the numbers for our hotels are going up. The other thing is that their average rates are also up. So you look at their occupancy rates, those are up. So those are all positive. And then the other big thing that we're working on is looking at what should we be doing in terms of driving more traffic to our community. And as I reported to you all last time, we were thinking of a country fest. So that's gone by the wayside after we continue to look through and say, okay, who's going to do the work? How are we going to do it? What's the best way to do this? Finally, we thought that perhaps somebody else might want to do that, like a Buck Hill, and we could be supporting. But that conversation will go on. What we are looking at right now, and I don't know whether it's something we should be talking about since it's still in. Yeah, so we're not going to report on it because
So we're going to slide on to the next subject.
Yeah, we're just going to let you know that it's still percolating, but it's not for reporting because it hasn't been acted on. But we're still looking at how do we continue to help drive traffic to our city. And so those are some of the things. Anything else that's of interest to our?
The only other thing, members of the council, is the CVB board's working on some minor changes to the agreement that we have with them. So
You'll see that, yeah.
You'll see that, I think, first meeting in October is the plan. We're waiting for the full board to review the final changes. They'll adopt it at our next meeting in September here, and then it will come before you shortly thereafter.
Yeah, our staff is working with them. They're mostly it's wordsmithing and the change of when they come before us to present the budget. Usually it's around October, but that's a little too early with some of the things, but our agreement says that they have to. And then there are some things that they do that they haven't been doing that they need to do with our staff.
Okay.
I'm big in governance, and so is Jenny. We're sort of nitpicking on so, but a lot of good things are coming out of a lot of that. Yeah, Dan.
I just wanted a final note after you're done.
Yeah. Nope, that's it because
finished?
that's yeah. everything, yeah, that was the last report.
Well, I just wanted to officially report on the Heart of the City race results. Craig Ebling, our former city manager, ran in it for the second year.
Did he win?
He did not win.
Did he improve his time? Did he improve his time? Did he improve his time?
Did he finish?
He
Did he
was,
finish?
as we all know, the air was a bit thick on Saturday morning, so they were all sweating pretty heavily. But we did have a cross-country ski, an Olympic cross-country skier who's training for the next Olympics there, and her husband, who's training for cross-country skiing for the Olympics for the first time. They actually work as athletic exercise mentors at a Boys and Girls Club, and they came down and they ran in it. They won the 5K men's and women's. And when he came across the line, I swear to God, he had just started running a half a block away. He was flying at the end of a 5K. He was running at top speed, and his time was incredible. And then she was shortly after leading the women. Anyway, we had 262 registered runners, and I think we had a dozen or so that registered that didn't show up, but that was 45% over last year. Our pre-registration numbers were much bigger than last year. Day of was a little less than last year, and I think the thicker dew point might have turned a few people away. The growth was all in the 5K. The 10K was pretty much flat, but the 5K, more than all the growth was in the 5K.
Who won the 5K?
Her name is Caitlin Gregg, and that's the Olympic.
Oh, and then who won the 10K?
They ran. I'm sorry, they ran the 5K,
Oh.
and I can't remember off the top of my head who won the 10K, but it was.
How did you place?
I didn't. I signed up this year. Different than in prior years, we had some kids from the club run with mentors.
Yeah, I thought you were running.
And I was a mentor. A couple of kids were not able to come, and because I threw my back out that Monday, I was happy to bow out because I would have been really bad. I would have walked most of it.
Wow.
But some unbelievable heart pulling stories from the kids to their mentors while they were running or jogging or walking, depending on what they were doing. They were sprinting and then running and sprinting and then walking, and of these kids going through the streets of Burnsville. Very good comment from Caitlin, the Greg. She said the track or the course through Burnsville was one of the best 5K courses that she had participated in, and they jump in every single one that they can get in.
And where did the course go this year?
Yeah. She said it was Steve.
Laid it out.
She said it was.
That's why it's that course.
It was.
Where did it go through? So you started out at City Center Park?
It went out on Nicollet, took a left
130th.
to 130th.
Over to Parkwood.
Oh, so over to Parkwood and then up to 134th and back around. She just said that it flowed,
Just like
the
the
hills
Patrick
gave it, some nice character, and she said that each segment transitioned so well. She said it was just great, and she looks forward to coming back and running it again, and so does her husband.
No hills.
Next year.
Oh,
Yeah, there's-
There are some hills.
Oh, yeah, there's.
That's not as bad. The 10K.
Parkwood.
I did hear some
Well, it's
10K
not-
runners
it's
go,
not
whoa,
like
those
coming up
hills are a
Nicollet.
beast.
No,
10K has the hills, yeah.
Yeah. There
Where
was
was
some,
the 10K?
That goes down Nicollet and then cuts over
like on Burnsville Park.
down. No, it goes down.
Travelers?
Yeah, it goes
Or
west on
goes- that's
Burnsville
right.
Parkway and then
then
cuts down Travelers Trail.
Travelers Trail, right.
And then comes back
And it
around,
comes uphill.
crosses over, and then goes all the way over to Parkwood and then back up.
Oh, that.
Oh, now that, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah, now that.
that's a down
yeah,
into
that's
the
not a
river valley
very-
and then back up.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not that big of a slant on Parkwood going on. Because that's where that.
Run it at full speed.
Yeah,
and see if you
no,
think there's no.
it's pretty decent.
I ride the bike down Parkwood. There's some grade to that.
Come back 130.
Yeah. It's surprising. It doesn't look like much, but then you get on a bike or you're running and it's like, wow, this is getting more.
It's Nicollet and 5 that I.
Yeah.
Well, that's brutal. But 130.
And 11, that's another bad
Yes.
one. We're over
And the
by where
bike-
you guys live. Yeah. 11 is bad.
Oh, we're coming at that valley. I mean.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, the kudos to the whole race, the city staff, the law enforcement officers that were out there were very, very helpful, as they always are,
Yeah.
in directing and helping. And we had a great group of volunteers, and it's growing. We expect it'll grow, in number of sponsors grow. Next year, we're going to be working with the chamber on getting more companies involved to get their teams. There was a team, and I can't remember the name, but there was a company that had about 10 or 11 shirts on, and that was the first big sign that we've attracted companies to put teams together. And
Nice.
Blue Cross Blue Shield had some folks out there, so it'll get bigger and bigger every year. And Tom Taylor, the Fire Muster Board Chair, was there and the morning of the race and was very impressed with the large, massive crowds. He said, "Wow, this is good. This is a big turnout and becoming a big event here on Saturday morning." So,
Good.
all good things.
Okay. Heather, anything else?
No, Madam Mayor, members of the council, we did pass out, the
Yeah.
intern did
Yeah,
give
thank
a
you.
map, and
Thank
we
you.
have a couple extra for the public, but I think Ms. Faulkner's planning on putting that on the website as well, but just wanted to let you know.
Yeah.
It's available.
Okay. Meg? Nothing. Anything else? Steve? Jenny? No. Okay. We're adjourned by acclamation. Thank you.
Thank you.